Very welcome back to the show. Now our next guest says she grew up hating herself and feeling like an imposter.
She now understands that she has a borderline personality disorder, something that was misdiagnosed for 20 years. We're so happy to have DJ Nikki Hayes with us on the couch. Hiya, Nikki. How are you?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was reading this, a borderline personality disorder. What is that as opposed to a personality disorder?
Well, it's actually a personality disorder all on its own, because a lot of people think when they hear borderline that it's, you just might
have a little bit of it. That's what I thought.
Yeah, no,
it's not as serious, that kind of thing.
No, it is. And the thing is that there's so many different personality disorders, but borderline is one that's made up of a couple of different components. So usually it's something that they can assess over the years, like you might have suicide attempts, you might have self-harm, self-image problems are always a big thing. Okay. But there's a system that they use, is called the DSM-5, and if you have 5 to 7 out of the 9 criteria, you then get diagnosed as borderline personality disorder.
It's amazing because we all know you from the radio for many years now, and we get this really bubbly person who's great fun on the radio coming across the airwaves to us, and then all of a sudden we don't associate you with this though.
No, and a lot of people have said that since I've talked out about it, that God, I never knew. But then when they think back and they think I was very impulsive, very, had disproportionate reactions to things, people go, oh, but now I kind of see where it could have been. I was always full on while I was on air, because it was kind of easy to, yourself, you just switch on and that's it. But, when I went home, it was very, very different.
So what is it that you'd have very, very highs and massive lows? Mm-hmm.
It's like literally one example I can always say is that my grandfather died one morning. I drove back to Dublin to go on the Late Late Show with Pat Kenny. My dog dressed up in a tuxedo. It was all very ha-ha-ha. And then I drove to a friend's sister's wedding in Wexford the same night and self-harmed while I got blotto that night. And that was like all in one day. And
did a switch just go off inside you that you were going to self-harm, or how did it happen? Unfortunately,
whenever I did drink, it would kind of enhance those feelings. So suddenly, where if I hadn't have been drinking, I might say, okay, I'm not going to go through with this, but then the impulsivity became a lot more driven once I was under the influence. Most definitely.
Your book, Crying into the Saucepan, it's really full on, and there's everything in it from anorexia, self-harm to suicide attempts. Can you just, I know it's over a period of 20 years, but can you outline for us, how these things happened within, is it like every couple of years, or how did you get gradually worse?
Yeah, well, the thing with borderline is that things happen, then everything's great, and then something else happens, and then everything's great. So that's kind of the pattern that it would have taken. I started off with an eating disorder, from that a suicide attempt, then another suicide attempt, then, depression, anxiety. My father died post-traumatic stress after he died, because me and him were so close. I just couldn't cope once he was gone. And then that moved on to postnatal depression, and then obviously my acute mental breakdown 2 years.
Yeah. When you had the acute mental breakdown, was that when you were sectioned?
Yeah, it was literally, I couldn't function, I couldn't think, I couldn't do. I just felt that I couldn't go on. I just felt like even the small things like functioning on a day-to-day basis just couldn't happen for me.
Tell us about the night, because your husband actually called the hospital and actually had you sectioned, and you needed to be. But tell us about the actual build-up to that night.
Yeah, well, Frank had been at the Ireland v Wales match at the Aviva, and I rang him and he says, something's not right with you, are you all right? And I said, no, I'm not doing too good at all. He came home and I was in the fetal position in the kitchen. I just was absolutely distraught, not really making any sense. I had taken an overdose and, a lot of prescription medication, and he brought me to the hospital. Well, he didn't. He called an ambulance, and an ambulance brought me. And I tried to get out. I pulled the IV drips out of my arms. There's blood everywhere. I was trying to get out of the hospital. They had to get a security guard to sit with me.
Had he ever seen you that bad before?
No. When I met him, he knew I had mental health issues. There was one time when he was serving overseas with the Defence Forces that he had to actually come home because I had self-harmed quite bad, and the doctors had asked him to come home. But this probably was of a exceptional level.
So you were pulling out all the IVs and everything?
Yeah, so they got a security guard to sit with me, and then the consultant on call, the psychiatrist on call, came down and they asked me would I stay here, and I said no if they let me go. I was running. I was determined that night that I was going out onto the M50 bridge in Blanchardstown, and I was jumping, and that was it. That was my clear focus at that moment. That's all I wanted to do. So he spoke with the psychiatrist, and they said that for my own safety, that they got his permission to keep me there. Yeah.
Did you have your daughter at that stage?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What age was Farah then?
Farah would have been a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you feel that the stress of, I suppose, being a new mom as well maybe led to that?
Well, the postnatal depression didn't help, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the problem was that was also boxed off into, you've got depression. They didn't look at the bigger picture. So I was trying to, borderline, you always want to be, the best you can be for everyone, even if it's killing you inside. So I was overcompensating for the fact that I'd had a, traumatic birth. I ended up with emergency section. So I was trying to compensate all the time, but it's not sustainable to be 110% all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. So
just tell us about Christmas Day again, because this is another time that stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, it was Farah's first Christmas, and Frank was overseas in Syria at the time, and myself and her, sat in on our own, and it was just that he wasn't there, I wasn't there. I went and got a small little boiled ham from Dunn's and, a crown of turkey, and, she had a great time, but I was in a very bad place that day. It was Christmas Day, everybody was happy. I think it was just around that time I realised that, my mind was very, very fragile, and things weren't going to, they weren't working well for me.
Yeah.
And what happened after that night?
Well, after that, the public health nurse who had been calling in on me, decided, well, she kind of made a call, and she was like, things, you're not coping, things are not going well for you at all. And that was when they referred me on to the postnatal support group and doctors.
Did you actually take the child off? Was it your mother-in-law, was it?
Oh, yeah, sorry, that's her first Christmas.
Yeah.
My apologies, yeah. I could hear, I had an emergency section, so I was on morphine, and his parents, Frank's parents, had come down to stay with us, and they did everything. I mean, we went into the kitchen to eat some dinner. I didn't even want to get up, but when I did, I started panicking that she might, burn beside the fire. Really irrational thoughts. And then I went up to bed and slept for about 3 or 4 days, and when I woke up, I could hear her crying downstairs, and I could hear Frank's mum, pacifying her, and she was great, but something in me just broke, and I went downstairs and I screamed at her, "Give me my child," and I went upstairs with her. But it was just the sheer terror that my child was a week old, and I didn't really even realise she was there. And it was also the fact that I was being the disproportionate reactions were unbelievable, and I attacked her when she definitely didn't deserve it.
Yeah. Now, the strain of all this ended your marriage.
Yes, unfortunately, in May, we separated, and I'm still very much in love with Frank, and it's heartbreaking.
He was your knight in camouflage.
He was, yeah. I mean, and I can't take that away from him, because he was always amazing and supported me, but living with someone with borderline personality disorder can be very hard. And I think he tried to extend his limits for me, and it got to the point where he just couldn't live with the way things were either.
And now, have you managed to control it in the sense of medications and all that? I mean, how is your day-to-day life now and going forward?
I'm with a multidisciplinary team, and they're great, and they keep an eye on me. So, I have a mental health nurse who will call me every week to make sure everything's okay. I'm on a stable amount of medication at the moment.
Okay.
It's quite high. I'm on a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant, a sleeping tablet, and antipsychotic. But all in all, they seem to be keeping me calm. And I guess the way I haven't fallen completely to pieces since, Frank and me separated probably shows that, medication.
Yes, good,
yeah.
And I know you said art therapy as well in the book and all that. It's good to have outlets. And I know that people might say, but these calming influences are very important.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I've kind of, sat in the background and said, I'm putting on weight and, whatever. And I've actually teamed up with Niall Hobbart. He's a personal trainer, and he has promised me he's going to completely change my body. So
it's good for your mind as well.
I think that's my next thing.
Just before we go, Nikki, for people watching here, what's the big message for people watching today?
That go and get help earlier. If you feel there's something else going on in the background and you feel your doctor's not giving you the right diagnosis, push them, because had I been diagnosed earlier, I wouldn't have spent 10 to 20 years of my life traumatised.
We have just a list here of just some of what you say people with borderline disorder would be going through. Anxiety, worry, depression, impulsive, as Nikki said herself, risky, self-destructive, hostility, a history of unstable relationships, difficulty feeling empathy for others as well, and having a stable or dysfunctional self-image. All these boxes ticked brings you to where you are today.
Yeah. Absolutely, okay. Yeah. And unfortunately, the big thing is the love of my life isn't there anymore. So,
well, we're sorry for that, but we're hoping
Yeah.
that you're on the mend now, and this cocktail of everything will
Absolutely, yeah.
bring you on to the next level.
Yes,
Thank you very much,
absolutely.
Nikki, for coming
thank
down.
you. You too.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Now,